Cool, thanks for letting me know. Yeah, I like working with these. Is this on the website? Yeah. Is that a guided one? Is that a guided one? Michael, did you load this on Stellar?
No, it's I'm on an R100 GS. My buddy's on an Africa Twin. Oh, come on.
I love this lecture. I like the lectures. You know, I've taken inspiration from you actually. I like the lectures where you're lecturing a bit, doing activity for a bit, like back and forth.
I think it helps a lot to break it up.
Yeah, it does. For an hour and a half. I revamped quite a bit of the class this year.
Yeah?
Yep. They designed human-powered blenders. They've actually.
Well, that's what they were doing.
They were testing power output with hand-powered kitchen tools. Like they measured power. We worked out the scaling relationships for how a blender, like blade size and speed and radius and all that stuff, change it, or how that affects the power of the fire.
Right.
And then they took all the information and synthesized the 8 concepts. It was really cool. And they came up with like very different things, and like all of them were awesome. Like really clever and like exploiting insights that they had gotten.
Very cool.
It was really neat. It was a good exercise. All right, you ready?
Yeah.
All right, folks, let's go ahead and start. I guess Kathy left, so I'll make this announcement. Did all of you get one of these purchasing instructions? There's some more up there. It will also be placed on Stellar, but read through these. This tells you how your team has to make purchases through Kathy. And she does orders multiple times per week, but if you need something urgently, she can do it like ASAP. This just allows us to control and track all the money in the class, and it's worked out really well in past years. So make sure you check this out. Next announcement is we have a guest speaker, if you didn't notice today, Mark Jeanette. So Mark is a really old friend of mine. We first met each other as interns in 2001. We were roommates at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, and yeah, have stayed friends ever since. He actually introduced me to my wife. So how's that for good?
Now you can actually call her your wife too.
I know,
Not just your girlfriend.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Mark has a really awesome background and history in product design in developing countries. He worked for IDEO based in Germany for a number of years. He worked for International Development Enterprises. And so he's going to, tell you about some of his background, and we're going to do an exercise related to ethnographic research, which is something he's done a lot of, and something that you guys just read about in Hidden in Plain Sight, which is Jan Chipchase's book. So today in the lecture, I want you thinking about Hidden in Plain Sight. We're going to talk about it more in the next lecture. But yeah, definitely be thinking about that during this exercise in Mark's lecture. So with that, hand it over to you, my man.
Thanks, Amos. Hello, everyone. We've got 35 in the class this?
No, we've got 53 in the class.
53.
Yep.
I hope I brought enough notes.
We have nine
Anyway.
teams.
Okay. For some reason
Do you
I
have
hadn't.
enough packets?
Barely.
We can
I
split.
do. We may combine groups a little bit. I'll take a look once we actually get to that point. So today is really going to be a whole bunch of questions. I'm going to start out with talking about some concepts. We'll talk about some techniques, and then part way through, and then again at the end, we'll actually do a little bit of practice on some of these techniques. First, this is not plugged in. Hello? All right. I guess I get to do it the manual way. So I'll go through some learning objectives, talk a little bit about maybe why you should listen to me. I don't claim to have all the answers by any means. We'll talk about what, why, and where you can actually do ethnographic research, and then talk about how to do it and do some actual practice. A word about the title. You're going to hear me say take a step back a bunch of times today, and it's really about trying to broaden your perspective and see things that are outside your current field of view. As engineers, we're really, really good at focusing in on a problem to the exclusion of everything else. So the real point here is to try to think about what you're not seeing and try to bring those peripheral things into your field of view. So, and this thing is off. Okay. That's why it wasn't working. So by the end of the session, I'd like you to leave here with ways to think about your own experiences, ways to learn more about others' experiences, more than you would see on the surface, and then really a motivation to practice. So first off, who am I? I did my mechanical engineering undergrad here, worked at BMW for a bit. I taught at Olin College for a little while. As Amos said, I worked at IDEO in Munich. Then I lived in Nepal for a year working on a rural electricity project, both on the user research side, but also in the mechanical engineering. And then spent a little bit over 2 years in Ethiopia working for International Development Enterprises, really talking with farmers, trying to uncover what are the technologies that can actually make a difference in their lives. And then worked on actually designing and building those. And now I'm a PhD candidate here in the department and a fellow at the Tata Center. I'm just going to let you read this quote for a minute, talking about where creativity comes from. Can anybody guess who said it? Who is that?
Steve Jobs.
Who said? Ah, you're right. 1996, Wired magazine. So the key is, in order to be effective in ethnographic research, you need to be thinking about your own experience, because the goal is really to get into somebody else's shoes. So you need to, the broader set of experiences that you have, the better you'll be able to understand other people and the people that you're trying to serve in your work. So, ethnography, what is it? And I will wait till somebody answers. Yeah? So a little bit louder.
Method of like observation of a community or some group of people to learn something about their way.
Okay, I'd say it's more than just a method. It's
It's the field of study that studies culture.
Exactly. So you're studying cultures and people. It includes methods for sure, but it's a little bit broader than that. It's just generally the study of people and cultures. So why do we do it as designers and engineers?
It's important to know the values of people we're designing for, so that we can design effective things for them.
So you're finding values. Can you go a little broader than that? What's the point of doing ethnographic research?
We want to know what problems are we facing.
Okay, finding problems. But that's what we're looking for in the users. Why do we do it? Okay, so we're going to find something that's new to us, something that we can't understand or that we don't inherently know. What do we hope that leads to?
Trying to put ourselves in their shoes.
Okay.
Same thing, you can empathize with the user.
But that's still not telling me why. What value does that bring to me as an engineer or a designer?
I think ultimately we want to make something useful.
Okay, you want to make something.
Yeah.
You want to make something that's useful to whom?
To whoever we're designing for.
Who's often not you, right? So is that understanding other people. I see the purpose of ethnography is really divided up into two different parts, and I'm really only focused on one today, and that's why I'm trying to drive this point home. All of these things relate to the first one, and that's we're looking for inspiration. We're looking for new ideas, for new markets, new uses, new technologies in order to serve a purpose. There's another part of ethnography that's more about finding data to support decisions. So And it's actually really encouraging that you all started out with these things because none of them really fall under the second part, which I'm not going to talk about today. But the ethnography that I'm talking about, it's really about getting these new ideas, as opposed to finding out whether people in South Africa prefer Coke to Pepsi. You know, that's inspiration. This side is really for when you don't know the questions yet. If you already have a question, then you're going out to find data. If you don't know your user that well, that means you still need to figure out what the questions are. So this is really what we're talking about today. So where do we hope that leads? So I guess I can put up the actual definition: study of human races and cultures. So we took a step back. Where do we hope that ethnographic research will actually lead? I've already mentioned a couple of possibilities. Anyone? We'll just flip through them real quick. Products, markets. This was just an example from IDEO, where Procter & Gamble had the Swiffer, and they wanted to follow on with that, and this is the Swiffer Carpet Flick, where the idea came out of a workshop where they discovered that if you take was actually a toilet paper roll, cut a slit in it, and then slide it around along a carpet, it will compress the carpet and then flick up any crumbs or anything with a little bit of mass and pop them up so that they're inside the tube. And that's really what led to this idea. Yellow Strom is a brand that's really in Germany that tries to serve the need that they discovered for people who wanted more feedback on how much energy they're using. It's a new application of a particular foam that was originally used for insulation, but then was used. They discovered that it could be used as this magic eraser. This is a Bank of America project. I know a bunch of banks do this now, where they will take any purchases that you make, round up to the next dollar, and take that extra change and just put it into your account for an extra little kick in your savings. But this came out of an IDEO project that was looking at users who wanted that extra little help to get over that activation energy to actually save a little more money. This is a way for them to do it without thinking about it. You guys have talked about the play pump, right? So what did they do right?
Understood the needs that people need some sort of manual way to pump up water.
Okay, so they identified the need for some sort of mechanical work and the need for water. Does someone else had a hand? The value of marketing, and actually the effectiveness of marketing to the rest of the world. Yep.
Seeing where there are unused resources.
Anyone else?
Along with marketing, connecting with public health needs or public health messages.
Public health messages. I would also add, that's a good list, I would also add that they recognized the power of a community coming together around a single focal point. In this case, around their kids and around the water well. And the meaning that a single pump would have to a community, because that was their source of water. And to gather people around that would make a big difference. I'm not going to go into why this was poorly implemented, but I think that there were some good insights in the initial stages of that project. So how do we actually do this? This is sort of the standard image that folks from IDEO put up, where if you're looking to make a product or a service, you're going to need to find this sweet spot where whatever you make is desirable, it's viable as a business or economically viable, and something that's technically feasible. The design thinking buzzword, the IDEO method, it's coming at a problem space from this direction first, answering that desirability question. And in order to do that, what do you need to do? I heard some.
Observe the people.
Observe. You need to understand the people. You need to figure out what is desirable, and that's where you need to get that inspiration and those ideas from. So, how do we actually do this? First, I want to take another step back and say, if your goal is to develop a product or service, somebody already mentioned this, you want to make something that's useful. So what does that mean?
You have to provide value in some way.
Okay. So what can value to the user look like? Okay.
Meeting needs,
Can you be a little more specific?
meeting needs more effectively than what they're currently doing.
Okay, be a little more specific about needs. What sorts of needs?
Could be anything, could be physical necessities, could be desires for different things, could be anything a person wants, whether or not they know they want or need it.
Okay. Now, what does better mean? What can better mean? Let's hear from some other folks. Cost? Okay.
Safer.
Safer?
More efficient.
More efficient? When you say efficient,
Power-wise,
power, energy? Okay. Let's just start shouting out some others if you've got them. What do you mean by effective? Better technology. What? Give me a scale, something that I can.
Instead of taking 95% of contaminants out of the water, it takes 98% out.
Okay. So it does what the product is supposed to do, but does it more so. Okay, I'll just call it effective. So the key here is you need to create that value in some way. You need to find some metric, whether that's quantifiable as an engineer or more qualified by the user. The key is that this is the value in the viewpoint of the user, in the eyes of the user. It may be something that you can actually measure and quantify, or it may not be. So, do I have anything else on my list? No. So that means if you want to make something better, what do you need to identify in current situations?
Already sex.
Yep. So basically you need to find out where are the sticking points. And that's what I end up looking for when I'm doing user research. Where are the places that aren't as smooth as they could be? And we'll get into that a little bit more in just a second. So, getting on to the nitty-gritty of this, who do you actually want to talk to? At IDEO, we tend to use the term extreme users. What I talk about oftentimes, if you think about a normal cell phone user, somebody who makes phone calls, somebody who text messages, maybe they have a few apps on their phone, those types of users are going to be the bulk of the people who use that technology. And it is definitely useful to talk to them, but where we often find a lot of good ideas, where if we're looking for, inspiration up there, is to talk to these people on the long tails on either side. The person who is absolutely against cell phones, doesn't want a cell phone, will never own a cell phone. Talk to them, figure out why. See if you can figure out what would make them be interested in a cell phone, what would make a cell phone useful or valuable to them. And then you've got the people who are modding their phones or adding widgets or programming their own apps on the other end of the scale. And you want to talk to those people too, because they're going to have some ideas. They're the people who are looking ahead at what's possible. So the other piece of who you want to talk to is, can you ever really look at a single user? So if I'm interested in farmers, this particular farmer is in India, and I want to understand his situation, is it enough just to talk to farmers? Who else could we talk to?
Why is it talk to his family?
Family? Actually, that's a good one. I don't have family up here. Who else?
Landowners.
Suppliers, landowners,
Customers.
customers, his animals. Sure, if you can manage the communication side on that, I say go for it. So his neighbors. This is an agricultural extension worker from the government who is supposed to provide advice to the farmer. This is a guy who actually works for him to spread fertilizer. A supplier, somebody mentioned. This is a testing lab for soil. This is somebody who is hired to harvest, and then customers, the people who actually buy and buy his product and carry it away. So again, it's take a step back. If you have a single user, certainly talk to them. But then if you take another step back and go 10,000 feet up, who are the people that he interacts with? And what's the key about watching those interactions? What are you looking at?
Want the interaction to be pleasant.
To be, sorry?
To be pleasant.
Pleasant, sure. But what's the key? What are you looking for? It's not so much you talking, oh, go ahead.
You're trying to understand unspoken needs and wants.
Unspoken needs and wants, certainly. But it's about communication. As soon as you get into groups, how does a group function? How does an organization function? It's about that space between people and how that communication happens, and that's what you end up watching. So if you can, yes, talk to all of these people, but at some point, being able to observe the extension worker talking to the farmer could be even that much more valuable. So next, where do you want to go? How do you in what sort of setting do you want to talk to your users? This is some sort of focus group in an obviously bland meeting room somewhere. Is this ideal?
Well, I think for different settings, you can see different things. So if you do it in a larger group, you can see the interaction points between different individuals.
Mhm.
But you may not get honest or fully honest feedback. They may hold things back.
Right.
So I think there's different venues you can do it in a larger group to get some types of interaction and some understanding.
Mhm.
But you also may want to have those individual conversations where you pull somebody away to figure out their true feelings about something.
Right, so certainly individual versus group interactions make a big difference, and you can get valuable things from both types of settings.
Do they also not want to pull them away from their environment and just kind of talk to them in their context? So,
Why?
because I think, well, at least one of the things is probably that, I mean, if someone is telling you about their experience, there are some things in their day-to-day life that they not take for granted, but it's like by definition, which might not be something that you're thinking about, and because they don't mention it, because it's just by definition to them, then you won't see it.
Exactly. So those types of, and I'll bring up a couple of examples here, the types of triggers that you have in your own environment, and not triggers in the negative safe space kind of way, but the things that that remind you of pieces of your experience if you're the subject will help you then sort of jog memories and help you better share your experience to the researcher. So in this case, this was a time when IDEO was doing a project for a hospital, and they wanted to communicate to the people who had hired them, the administration of this hospital, what the patient experience was like. So this guy actually went to the hospital, was quote unquote admitted, and took a video camera of, I think, 6 hours like this. And then they didn't force the administration to watch all of the 6 hours, but I think the point got across. So there's the researcher going into the environment, and then there's watching users in their own environment. So the notion that a lot of things you learn away from your desk. If you're watching kids cook, it's going to be very different than talking to kids about cooking. In this particular case, they found a sticking point of cleaning a wire whisk and came up with this. So how do you actually go about doing this? There's a big thing about, somebody mentioned earlier, I don't remember the term that they used exactly, but it was the same idea. Watching for unspoken cues and watching for the things that people are doing as opposed to actually saying. So what sort of things do you look for? It's paradoxical behavior. I think this was one of the pieces that went into the Panasonic Tough book, was the realization that notebooks get beat up. Would anybody do that to their Mac? In this case, the guy on the right was asked to try out a piece of software, just a prototype. And afterwards they asked him, what'd you think? Was it easy to use? And he said, yeah, it was okay. If you weren't there to actually see that reaction, really all you could have done was taken at his word. So people don't always mean what they say. This was someone where we were interviewing her about TV use and TV watching, and we asked her about it sitting in her front room, whether she had a nice big TV. And she said, yeah, my husband and I watch the news every night before we go to bed, and that's it. That's the only time we watch TV. And then the researchers asked her a little bit more about her home and show her where she lives. And she took them back to her sewing room, where she spends most of her time. And it required being in this setting for her to remember, oh yeah, I have the TV on 8 hours a day when I'm sitting here doing my sewing projects. So you're going to get very different things when you take a step back, when you look at those wider settings. Little things called thoughtless acts, watching people and their group behaviors. So probably, so one person started putting a cup here when they realized that they couldn't take it with them into the subway. And then everyone else followed suit. So where do you think they could put a recycling bin? Exactly. The picture on the right, this was it's actually a set of raised dots on the floor intended to help people with poor eyesight to track along the hallway. But it's used by people who are walking while they're looking at their cell phones. So you have, when you're paying attention, you can start asking, why do people do things? And noticing things like this, and that can lead to other insights. So looking out for errors. In this case, this was a secretary who was responsible for conducting conference calls, and the way that she decided to do that, what made sense for her, was to put a whole bunch of phones together, put them on speakerphone when everyone was talking to each other, and then suppose two people wanted to have a private conversation, she would set that up. But it made sense for her. It made more sense than trying to understand icons or buttons or labels on a single teleconference system. And so that can lead to insights into interaction design. How would you design a teleconference system? How would you put together a piece of software that could allow her to do this, that would give her the feedback that she needs to know that the people who are having a conversation are doing what they need to do. One more on this list of examples. This was an anesthesiologist, I believe, who has to monitor the patient, their state of awakeness, if you will, during a surgery. And she has this device that, the designers were very considerate. It has a long cable that she can use to connect back to the pumps that are administering the drugs, but it takes two hands to use. So this group put on a thumb wheel on the side and made it usable with one hand because they noticed the anesthesiologist was holding the patient's hand. And so having that one hand free made her work that much more effective, both in terms of a feedback to the patient, but also providing comfort to the patient. So, I'm going to have everyone get up and sit with your teams, and one person from each team come up to the front, and I'm going to give you a bunch of photos.
I'll get some photos.
All right. Actually, everyone take one of these sheets. Amos, are there two smaller teams?
They're all the same size.
They're all the same. Wow, how'd that work?
Well, we've got 1 and 5. The rest are 6.
Okay. I'm debating on, because I know that these two sets aren't ideal. Let's start out with these. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 folks. All right. Write the name of the picture set, or sorry, the number of the picture set on top of your sheet. Take that one for now, and I may switch. Ah, great. And take one sheet. Got it? Okay.
Sorry to tell you, there's 4 teams this year. Blank.
And I knew it. I just, for some reason, I still have in my head that we only had 7. And I've been meaning to get new photo sets for a while. But
One thing, you're going to do a wrap up at the end, right?
Yeah.
I think one thing to reflect on that I've been trying to instill in them is like a lot of these techniques we're talking about, they might not be able to do personally, but there's going to be teams they're interfacing with that are going to be doing these things. And they need to be cognizant of those other teams' actions and the data they're doing. You know?
that's a good point. Yeah, I do plan to talk a little bit about the class constraints.
I really like this lecture.
So what was the
Good, thanks.
You give them time. How much time?
Whoops. No. So I'm going to see where we are in about 10 minutes.
So, we can spread everyone. Okay, guys, let's sit in a circle. Okay, let's do this.
I have a slightly different exercise to use at the end as well.
So on Monday, they're going to, I'm going to talk to them about developing world wheelchairs, just a quick intro, and then they're going to start generating design requirements for developing world wheelchairs, just off the top of their head, right? Basically, no context. Then they're going to ride it. Each team's going to do an obstacle course across campus, including like going into a bathroom and getting on the toilet.
Or is there another?
Yeah, go ahead.
And so they're going to get a bunch of perspective and then come back here and revise their set of design requirements.
That's awesome.
Do you have anything to prep for Monday?
Yeah. You, son, need to go get 7 wheelchairs from Matt McKinney.
Am I allowed to take the truck?
Yeah. I'll use my phone to get the other 2 from my house. So you get 7. You'll probably have to line them up out in the hall.
When should I pick them up? Monday morning or Friday?
I will leave that all to you to coordinate with Matt directly.
You go, Matt.
I will show up.
A little bit more drinking. He was making
And then on to Portland It's like really valuable.
Purity diversion is a
just that. That's the
They like cold coffee or whatever this is. I think they're reading something on like the phone screen here. So, okay. Oh, maybe take a Kindle as a chapter title. Yeah.
Be the most appropriate slide, for sure.
No, I'm gonna give it away.
Yeah, I think it's a month. And then,
So
That
reading.
was really wild.
Thanks, man. I hope so. I got like no feedback. The people generally felt like they liked it. So Don said, yeah, it seemed like it went well. People were there and they were happy and engaged. So I was like, okay.
I would say health.
we're not going to have everyone talk about their subject, but does one team want to talk about what they learned from the pictures? Just run down your sheet. Anyone?
Here's an Easter egg. One of the sets is from my mom.
Kind of what we gathered from our team.
So make sure everyone can hear you.
We think we had a person who was at their vacation home, kind of just relaxing and enjoying their relaxing life.
Okay.
Retired life. So, I don't know. It was lots of pictures of.
Go ahead and read down the list.
Oh, okay. So, name and age. We had some disagreement. We said male, 40 to 60. Covered a lot. Occupation, retired. Seemed to have a lot of free time. So, family situation, married or with a partner. He has a dog. What country? U.S. Northeast. We saw a grocery store that we looked at. Hobbies. So recycling, gardening, sunbathing, sewing. Attitudes to technology. Thinks it's not essential. They have a really old school vacuum that doesn't. He has his own sewing machine and all that stuff. Values, nature, locally grown stuff. Recycling.
So we recycle sticker.
Okay.
Dream vacation, I think he's on it. So attitudes and preferences for food. Definitely fresh and locally grown. He saw lots of pictures of his garden. Organic food. Media interest, reading, maybe some TV, but we didn't see anything. This is, I think, where things got harder and more interpreting, but personal strengths and weaknesses. So he's independent and probably pretty well off. Weakness, there's not a lot of interaction with other people. Next big life event, we said grandchildren or puppies.
All right. Anybody else want to run down their list real quick? Go for it.
So we had a, I guess, a 25 to 28-year-old female, Annie. We're pretty sure she's a product designer at IDEO or some of these other companies, but we're pretty sure it's okay. She looks like she's single and living independently on the United States West Coast, probably around SF area. So her hobbies and interests are pretty extensive. They include camping, motorcycles, furniture design, construction, do-it-yourself projects, reading, whiskey, snowboarding, flying planes, traveling, and playing the guitar. Her attitudes to technology, she's probably an early adopter. We saw a couple photos of iPads, Kindles, universal remotes, stuff like that. Alexa, the Amazon thing. Key values are that she's healthy, she's independent, she's adventurous. Her dream vacation is probably somewhere 300 miles up the coast of California. So she probably eats out a lot because her fridge only has kind of junk food in it. You can't really sustain yourself on that. Her immediate interests are instructional books, ones that are describing personal independence and culture. Something that her personal strengths and weaknesses. She's great at multitasking, hobbies, she's quick to learn, she's got a lot of self-motivation. Potential weaknesses could be that she's super idealistic and that she buys a lot of stuff. Her next big life event, probably a cross-country motorcycle ride or potentially a relationship. Her next big purchase is going to be a newer, nicer, older model of whiskey. She cares about having a lot of experiences and learning a lot of things.
Okay. So think about your photographer in this case, and think about what products do you think that you might design for them. Where are the hiccups in their life? What might you make easier, safer, more energy efficient, more effective for that particular user? Is that easy to do? What do you think you need in order to answer those questions?
I would love to talk to the user.
Okay.
Find out what they want.
I would love observation over time, like a certain time window, not just like these fixed snapshots.
Okay. So yeah, so there's, obviously we're really limited that we only have single snapshots, but do you think that you could actually figure a fair bit out from those pictures? Now, how much of that, of those things that you discovered that you wrote down on the sheet, how much of those things are fact, and how much of those are things that you had to figure out or infer for yourself? A lot? Okay. Now, how much of yourself and your own assumptions went into those inferences? A lot. So that's something that you need to be aware of when you're doing this type of work. And it's true even if you have the person right in front of you, even if you can ask them questions. You need to do some inferences, but you also need to be aware of those prejudices that you already have, not necessarily prejudices, but biases and the amount of yourself that you're putting into the conclusions that you're reaching. So what do you think you learned? Was this easy, hard?
The inference part is particularly hard, especially when trying to avoid your own prejudices.
Mm-hmm. So,
like being willing to redesign your inferences based off of new information.
Mhm.
You started off with a few photos and came up with an idea of who it was, and then got more information from other photos.
that's an interesting way to do it, to start out. And you could even constrain the problem a little bit yourself by picking a few photos, seeing what you can do with those, and then adding in new information. But that's an additional challenge of, if you have a picture of this person in your mind that's already formed from the initial set of photos, changing that picture in your mind can be more challenging than trying to absorb all the information at once. But the key is that you're going to get different insights depending on how you do it. And there is no hard and fast rule book for this is how you do ethnography, particularly when we're talking about the inspiration side of ethnography. Try different techniques, try different approaches, try to come at it, whether it's with different users, you don't necessarily need to use the same procedures because it's as much an experiment on yourself as it is on the other person. So, so does it really matter if your answers were right or wrong? We had a team up here with a ringer who happened to attend the same university that was pictured in the photos. So he had more information than anyone else, well, certainly than anyone else in the room, about that particular user, let alone that user was in India. But does it really matter if you know what the truth is?
I think it does, because if you design for a person who doesn't exist, they probably aren't going to want what you give them.
True. So when do you find out if your inferences were correct?
When you prototype and test it. And I mean, like, not even on the prototype, but sharing your ideas and concepts with these people that you're designing for, and they give you feedback in real time, and they could come up to you and say, this is bullshit, I don't want that, and you're going to be wrong.
Right?
It's just whether they buy it or not.
True. So not until you've gone through the rest of that cycle of creating something and taking it back to users to get feedback, where you're not specifically testing that inference that you made, but you're testing the thing that came out, the ideas that came out of that initial inference. And so it's a long cycle. And really what it comes down to is doing the best you can, and then continuing the process from there, turning those inferences into new ideas, into new products, and then getting feedback. And so whether or not the exact inference that you made is correct, that's arguable. But it's more about the process, and you do find out whether or not what you've done along the way is generally correct only at the end, when you've actually taken a prototype or something back to the user to see.
Me, since I was the one with the university, I feel that there will be a definite bias if I go ahead with this project, whatever I'm trying to design. Because the the good thing is that I have been at the place where it is all there, so I know the place pretty well. I know the environment. I know everything. The bad thing is that I might not be as creative as somebody else.
That's a really good point. Having fresh eyes on a problem or fresh eyes in a setting is really, really valuable when you're looking for this type of inspiration, because you're going to see things that you won't notice because you've been there. At the same time, you can provide some additional detail and richness to what you're seeing in the photos, because this exercise is really limited the same way you're really limited in trying to work on your project that may be in Indonesia when you're sitting in Boston. All you get are these snapshots, the things that your clients can share with you. And so any additional detail you can get or richness of those details can be beneficial as well. So you have both an advantage and a disadvantage in the process. So let's just go through some quick tips in general about doing this type of research. If you're actually going out and speaking with a user, obviously you want to get them to talk more than you do. There's helpful guidance and nudges that you can give to a user as a researcher to get them to talk and open up about the pitfalls and the hiccups that they experience, and to try to elicit those opportunities. But it's more nudges and then stand back and let them talk. Observing not just the person but the space. In general, if you're going out and talking to users, and if you go out, you're not going to do any exercises of going out and meeting people in Boston, are you? Okay. Having more than 3 researchers for a single user can be a bit overwhelming. Pictures and notes are great. That's usually what I would use. Video can be useful, but it can be cumbersome when you need to review it later as well. The general goal here is to be naive. That's why that additional experience can be a little bit of a handicap. You want to be able to ask the dumb questions, because that's going to help you find the sticking points and getting people to open up. Again, trying different techniques and take a step back. So I want to try a second exercise, except this one's in pairs. So you should be able to stay where you are. Everyone find a partner, and one of you is going to be the interviewer, the other one's going to be the interviewee. So do that now. Like, take 5 seconds, and then I'm going to stop and tell you what's next.
Give me the partner of the other person.
Okay, does everyone have a partner?
Yes.
Okay. Amos, can...
I don't have a partner. You don't? All right, I'll be your partner. Oh, you guys? You guys.
Amos, can you help with this?
Yeah, sure.
I want the interviewer to raise your hand. Keep it up.
Okay.
Amos and I will hand you a slip of paper. Keep it with the interviewer side up. Only the interviewer reads that side of the paper. Once you're done, you're going to hand the slip to your partner. They're going to turn it over without reading the first side, and they're going to read the back of it. And you have directions on what you're going to do. Okay? So interviewers with your hands up. All right, excuse me. Interviewer. Pass this one down. All right. Can you, yep. Yep. Excuse me, guys. Did you get one? We're one short. All right, once you guys are done, can you pass it to them?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a shorter one. You'll take maybe 4 or 5 minutes at most.
Did you both, interviewer and interviewee?
Well, it's going to be one interview. You each have your directions.
Okay.
So they're going to be talking to each other. Yeah, each of you reads your instructions. The interviewer reads the interviewer instructions. The interviewee reads the interviewee instructions. And then you start talking to each other. Is anyone done with their slip? We need one extra. Oh, they've got it there. The interviewer gets different directions than the interviewee.
Oh, no, I mean, like, the interviewer is on the same route.
Yes. So all of the slips are the same.
This is new.
Yeah.
Cool. I haven't read it.
Okay, can someone who was an interviewer, can you tell me what you think the directions were that we gave to the interviewees? Go ahead.
I think that they were not addressing any particular problem like directly. They were probably just like trying to give just like a general ideas of the activity that he did during the day. Maybe like at least I didn't see any particular problem that I needed to solve right away.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, they're extremely positive about everything, so like everything was as good as
Anyone else?
Just extremely vague also.
All right, so one of the interviewees. Can you fill in the rest of the interviewers? What were the directions?
So the direction said that in some cultures it's more important to keep harmony than to keep truthfulness. So the point was that you at all costs had to keep the interviewer happy and make sure they had a positive impression on you, because in the end they're not going to follow up with any specific thing that you say.
Did everybody get that up here? So the interviewees, their goal was really to keep the interviewer happy, to give them a positive impression of the visit, of you as a person, of your community. Does anybody know why I did that? Because,
Because then you're trying, I mean, the interviewers are maybe looking for a problem, and you can't just ask, okay, what's the problem? Answer, everything's great. I love my life.
Yeah. Amos said that he may have alluded to this once or twice already in the class. Who here has done user research internationally? Okay. Who of you done it? Who of you have done it in a place where you didn't speak the language? Okay. So what kind of problems come up in that setting? Okay. Translators, interpretation. What else?
There's often not words for some of the things you say.
So just that translation.
Hard. It also is like, then the translator has to decide what other words they want to use and then that can not to use.
Yep.
If you're very clearly a foreigner, then often the community wants to like make a good impression and make it seem like give you information that will make you talk positively about the community.
And a truth about, let me make sure the mic's on, a truth about this type of work. If you're in a village somewhere, or so, if you're the one being interviewed, what's the likelihood that this person is going to come back or follow up or check on the things that you say? Pretty low, right? So the downside of not answering direct questions, or the downside of giving a rose-tinted picture is pretty small. So how do you combat that, or not combat it? How do you deal with that as a researcher?
If you don't speak the language, it's always helpful to have a translator from the community if possible, because they can act as a really helpful medium.
Yeah.
Well, so I've experienced doing that, and sometimes the translator from the community actually colors what people say, because he or she is also vested in the community, and oftentimes holds like a position of some prestige or authority in the community, and feels a need to represent the community in a positive way. So I think that's something useful, but also comes with its drawbacks as well.
Yes, I would agree, like center from the region is important, because I did a lot in Central America, but often people I went with they had learned Spanish in South America. So like even the words that people were using had a different meaning in South America versus Central America. So I think that was a challenge. But kind of the ways that we got around that is we use like body language, like look how people are actually acting versus like what they're saying, and then ask additional probing questions in a nice way to figure out what they really mean versus what they're currently saying to you.
All right. So a lot of it comes down to nonverbal cues, asking questions multiple times from multiple different directions. Translators are pretty key, but even with the perfect translator, you still want to watch out for the nonverbal information, nonverbal cues. Culture clashes can also be an issue, or whether I as a male am allowed to enter the cooking hut. Often that's those types of things, or depending on what you're talking about, specific gender roles within the family or within particular tasks, ability for certain family members to travel or to speak with foreigners or to outsiders. What about experts? Who's worked with local experts before? Anything that you would watch out for there if you're trying to find inspiration and sort of if you're trying to get at the truth of what a situation is?
They have a lot of their own biases about what they think works in that region. And especially if they're an expert they're in like a particular field, they think the solution to the problem is related to their area of expertise. Whereas if you're just talking to the community, just in general, you might find there's another completely off-the-road solution.
Yep.
Just trying to take a guess, would the expert fall in the middle 80% of the normal curve and not on the extreme side of the user?
That can be the case. Experts can be really useful in terms of who they know in the community that you're studying, base knowledge, being able to interpret some of the whether it depends on what type of expert they are, of course. Interpret some of the cultural things, but they do bring with them a lot of bias. And I'm not trying to say that any of these they're not the end of the line or they're not deal killers. Some of them can be construed as positive or negative, but the real key is that you're aware of them, that you understand that any expert you talk to is going to color their answer a little bit in one direction or another. And so it's not that any is really good or bad, it's that you need to be aware of them. You need to take that step back and think about what are the biases that this expert is going to be bringing into the answers that I'm getting from them, or what is this member of the community, what's going on in their mind that I can't see out front that might make them answer a question one way or another.
So I was just going to say, I think in some cultures there is kind of an attitude of like just kind of in a way just stay in your comfort zone. So like in some environments, the expert or someone that's used to doing something will just have a way that they do it, and if you suggest something that's different, they'll be like, oh no, we just don't do that. So
you will get that answer.
how would you like overcome, like how would you suggest it or pitch it in a way that like, I don't know, would increase the likelihood of acceptance?
I think a lot of times, it depends on what you're proposing for one, but a lot of times it really just comes down to coming back at it from a different direction. Asking the same question a little bit differently. Asking it from the perspective of someone else. Getting someone to talk about a third person is often more effective at getting a straight up answer than asking someone about their own experience. And there are some situations where you just can't negotiate through it. You need to do with it, you need to, you need to take what you can get. And that's where inference comes in. That's where a broader understanding of the entire picture will help you fill in those gaps. Wanted to talk, so a lot of these things I already talked about, but specifically class constraints. So you are in the context of a one-semester course. You're not going to be going to visit your users. So you need to work through your partners in order to figure out what's going on the ground, which is an additional challenge. Some people around here might call that MIT hard. So what are ways to do that? If you have yourself and your team here, you have your partners that you're talking to, and you're trying to understand a system that they are already working in, how do you go about dealing with that?
We ask for a video of their customers or their consumers.
Some sort of a raw video as opposed to something that's been produced?
Yeah,
or
it's like a fresh one from the sales department. So
Okay.
somebody who's outside the department, so we can also understand.
I'm going to write some of these down. So talking to someone outside the department, or going outside the department. What else?
Doing research on the culture, the government, community, scanning living, things like that.
So background research.
Would it be important to understand the hierarchy, organizational?
Anybody else while I'm writing? Oh boy, I'm going to mess this up. I know I screwed that up. Competitors, okay. I like the, let's see, there's a video. I like the idea of asking your partners to go out and not necessarily present your questions to the users, but to collect something that's somewhat a little bit less biased in terms of in the form of a video. What about talking to other organizations that work in a similar space or work with those people? So not just outside the department, but other orgs. Yep.
I was thinking you could talk to people who are from the country, but they're here. So
very good.
Get more information about their cultures.
The locals, as in Bostonites. What else can you do?
We try and recreate the environment.
Recreate or simulate. Come as close as you can to experiencing what your user is really going through. That's one of the big things that I would suggest for this class in particular. If you can't go there and try to chop down a palm frond, just go get a tree cutter and try to see how hard it is to actually move a rod that's that long, or try to operate anything that's that far away. Too bad you can't just you don't have a Ferrari that they could drive, do you? That's too bad. This is a pretty good list. I like this one. So I think I will stop it there. That's our
I
time.
will say though, if you ask Ferrari to hook you up with a dealer here, you might be able to drive one. I wouldn't throw that. They might let you.
Never underestimate the power that comes with saying you're from MIT.
Cool. All right, let's give.
Thanks very much.
2 announcements. I'm going to post another reading assignment on the website for reverse innovation. That's your next reading. And then on Monday, be prepared to go outside. I don't know what the weather forecast is, but we're doing an exercise that will involve going outside. Have a good weekend.
Please bring your photos back up to the front and your sheets.
I think you guys have my mom.
Thank you.
What?
Yeah.
I actually sent you an email just last night. So it's about a maker fair.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I haven't actually read that email yet.
Okay, I actually wanted